Republican election denialism is causing a real threat to the peaceful transfer of power. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. You recently wrote an article describing the asymmetry of election denialism in the country. Explain to us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so, I was inspired to write this because I saw a poll out of Arizona that said that half of Republicans in the state want Donald Trump to contest the outcome of the election if he loses before the election has taken place, before a single ballot has been cast, before there can be any claim of fraud or irregularity. They already want him to contest the election. Whereas when you look at the number on the Democratic side, it is like 10%, right? So there is an asymmetry in how election denialism has set up the two parties, where one party is like, we definitely want to contest the election no matter what, where one candidate in the person of Donald Trump is saying, oh, I won Minnesota. And you're looking at it and you're like, wait a second, what do you mean you won Minnesota? Like you lost Minnesota by over 200,000 votes. And his party believes him. And you have one candidate in the person of Donald Trump who at a rally in New Jersey says, I'm going to win New Jersey. He says, I'm going to win New York. And then you have another party who is like, well, we are committed, in the Democratic Party, who's committed to the peaceful transfer of power, who's like, we really want Joe Biden to win, but we also want to make sure they're free and fair elections, who does not believe that Joe Biden won Alabama in 2020, who does not believe, breaking news, that Joe Biden is going to win Mississippi or Louisiana in 2024, and who is not lined up to say that if Donald Trump wins, Arizona, no matter what, that Joe Biden needs to contest the outcome of the election. So there is this grave asymmetry between the two parties. And what that is doing is creating a real threat to the peaceful transfer of power. Because if you have a party that says, no matter what, we believe that there needs to be an election contest, no matter what, the election cannot be legitimate if Donald Trump doesn't win, then how can you have a peaceful transfer of power if that party loses? And so I'm very, very, very worried about this. And so I wrote this piece for Democracy Docket. It is free to everyone. I hope that if you are watching this video, you are already subscribed to Democracy Docket for free. And you get the daily and weekly newsletters, as well as all of the other content that we push out, because this is deadly serious stuff. I mean, we saw a violent insurrection on January 6th. And if you are not paying attention to what's happening in the courts now, then frankly, you're simply not paying attention to what's happening to democracy. So please make sure you are subscribed in the free link, below. If you want to get the additional paid content, you can subscribe as a premium member. You can become a paid member as well. But either way, I hope you are signed up.
Republicans are quick to point out that some Democrats in 2016 called Donald Trump's election illegitimate. So how is that any different from GOP election denialism?
Yeah, it's apples and oranges. I mean, let's just start with some basic facts. In 2000, Al Gore lost by a few hundred votes after the Supreme Court halted a recount. He immediately conceded. In 2004, John Kerry lost by a few thousand votes in a single state of Ohio, and the next morning he conceded. In 2008 and 2016, Barack Obama won, and John McCain and Mitt Romney conceded. In 2016, the election you ask about, Hillary Clinton called Donald Trump the night of the election to concede. The next morning, she gave a speech conceding, saying that Donald Trump needed our support because he was going to be our president. Okay, so this is mythology that somehow that there is a parallelism here. Now, were there questions raised by Secretary Clinton and others, myself and others, about the tactics Donald Trump used to win the election? Absolutely. And by the way, in a courtroom in New York City, some of those concerns have played out in a criminal trial. And by the way, not the only criminal trial that Donald Trump's supporters have been involved in related to the 2016 election. So sure, there are people who believe that Donald Trump won that election by doing some really terrible things, some really illegitimate things, including perhaps falsifying records and paying off porn stars. But that is not the same thing as saying that we are challenging that the vote totals were inaccurate, that somehow there were illegal ballots, That has not taken place among Secretary Clinton or her supporters. And so this is a total false comparison.
Since 2020, we have seen contests against election challenges fail. We have seen indictments for people involved in efforts to overturn elections in Arizona, Georgia, Washington, D.C. We've seen states change their laws around election certification, fake electors. Do you think any of the things that have happened since 2020 would discourage Republicans from trying, January 6th 2.0?
So look, again, this is part of what I write about in the Democracy Docket piece. I think that unfortunately it's gotten worse, not gotten better, right? I mean, the fact is that election denialism is much, much more central to the identity of the Republican Party and the Trump campaign in 2024 than it was in either 2016 or 2020. I mean, in 2016, you could point to a number of things that Donald Trump campaigned on. He campaigned on building a wall, which was ridiculous. He campaigned on a whole bunch of sort of ridiculous economic theories, trade policies. In 2020, he again campaigned on a whole bunch of things that he had done while he was president, a lot of which were lies, but they related to when he was president. In 2024, the only thing he's campaigning on is election denialism. I mean, if you think about it, he waffles back and forth on a bunch of other issues, but the only thing he is consistent about is that he believes that the election was stolen in 2020 and that there will be massive fraud in 2024, and that Republicans need to be prepared for that. So election denialism is the central tenet of the Republican Party and his campaign, and his claims about election denialism have become much more outrageous. I mean, we've gone from him lying about the results of 2020 in a handful of states. Now he's lying about the results of 2020 in states like Minnesota, which he lost by 7 percentage points. So it's gotten much worse. It's also, by the way, Paige, gotten much worse among the Republican Party. There were people in the Republican Party who were pushing back against Donald Trump in 2016, a lot of them. There were people pushing back against Donald Trump's election denialism in 2020. Not enough Republicans, but there were some. Look at the parade of Republican on Sunday television. It's like literally a convention they hold every week for invertebrate politicians, in which they prostrate themselves on TV every week, saying that they don't necessarily agree that Joe Biden won in 2020 and predicting fraud in 2024. People like Tim Scott, who is supposed to be a moderate, people like Marco Rubio, who we are constantly told is one of the sensible Republicans in the middle of the Senate. These people are now full out election deniers. They are showing up at his criminal trials wearing matching suits and ties. The Speaker of the House showed up wearing a matching suit and tie. I mean, there is nothing left to the Republican Party other than election denialism, which is why they kicked out Ronna McDaniel, replaced her with a more reliable and aggressive election denier, and why they now have Donald Trump's daughter-in-law running the RNC.
Mark, it's interesting you point that out because it is true. Even the non-election issues tie back to election denialism, right? Like Republicans love to talk about immigration. Their new argument is now that you have people coming into the country who are not citizens and are voting in mass and causing mass election fraud. So even immigration has become an election denial issue.
Yeah, it's like the one way to get Donald Trump's attention. Like, remember, we used to see this where, like, if you were running for House or Senate, you would try to wave your arms to get Donald Trump's endorsement by like saying something about how great a president he was, or how, you two want to build a wall. Now, if you want to get Donald Trump's attention, you tie it to election denialism, right? You either go on TV, if you want to be his vice president, you go on TV and you say that, you too deny the outcome of the 2020 election and you too are like, believe there's massive fraud. And if you want to get your attention to other issues like immigration, like you said, you now tie it to election denialism. Like soon you're going to see the oil companies, who want to drill more and spoil the environment. They're going to be like, we think that there was cheating in the election about oil drilling rigs, or that the oil drilling rigs are a way to prevent elections from being stolen. The only honest voters are the ones drilling in the national parks, right? I mean, this is like the one way to get Donald Trump's attention.
So given all that, the fact that the Republican Party is so singularly focused on election denialism, on lies about election fraud, What do you think happens between now and Election Day? And maybe more importantly, between Election Day and Inauguration Day?
Right. So here is the Republican plan for 2024. And if you are not paying attention to this, pay attention just to this one part. Republicans want to make it harder to vote and easier to cheat. That's their plan. They want to make it harder for people to vote, particularly people who they don't view as their constituents. So they want to make it harder for Black voters, young voters, Hispanic voters in particular to vote. But they're happy to target any group of voters who are not their voters. So you saw, for example, the Republican running for Senate in Wisconsin, suggest that old people in nursing homes shouldn't be allowed to vote because they're going to die really soon. Why? Presumably because they vote Democratic. Okay. So number one, they want to make it harder to vote. So they are passing legislation to make it harder to vote. They are bringing litigation. One page, a story that Democracy Docket has sort of owned, and I think is really the only news outlet that covers, is how much more voter suppression litigation there is, how many more lawsuits the Republican Party brings literally to make it harder to vote. People think that all the voting litigation are by the good guys. There's a huge tidal wave of bad guy voting litigation trying to make it harder to vote. And Democracy Docket has done exposés on a number of the leading purveyors of these kinds of voter suppression litigation. So make sure you are subscribed. The links are in the show notes below. So they want to make it harder to vote. The other thing they are doing right now is setting it up to make it easier to cheat. Now, what do I mean by easier to cheat? They want to make it easier to cheat in the post-election period, right? They tried to cheat with fake electors. They tried to cheat through a whole bunch of crazy lawsuits involving mythological creatures and then Venezuelan leaders. They tried to make it easier to cheat. Speaker Johnson himself was one of the leaders of this. They tried to make it easier to cheat on the House floor, by refusing to certify the election results. So they did those things in 2020, but Paige, as you and the Democracy Docket team have really talked a lot about. We saw in Cochise County, Arizona in 2022, they tried to make it harder to cheat, easier to cheat after the election by not certifying the election results, right? So that is the other part of this, is that they want to harass election officials. Democracy Docket has covered 3 lawsuits by Republicans and their allies to strike down laws that prevent the harassment of election officials. Now, why would you want to strike down a law that prevents the harassment of election officials, except that you want to be able to cheat in the post-election by intimidating them, by, those images of people banging on glass, trying to prevent these people from doing their job. For Donald Trump tweeting, "Stop the count," right? What did Laura Trump Page say about why they filed the first lawsuit that Donald Trump's campaign filed of the cycle? What did she say was their purpose in Nevada?
Laura Trump went on Fox News and was like, we don't think mail-in ballots should count after Election Day. You should count all ballots by Election Day.
Yeah. Right. I mean, so they're telling us what they want the post-election to look like. Right. They want it to be a much more aggressive version of what we saw in 2020, presumably with more competent lawyers. And I think the folks on our side need to understand we're not going to get Rudy Giuliani with hair dye dripping down his face, standing in front of a lawn mowing service between a porn shop and a crematorium. We're not going to get that. We're not going to get Jenna Ellis, fresh off traffic court. We're not going to get Sidney Powell with her mythological kraken. All 3 of them have been indicted, by the way. The Trump lawyers from last time, they got other problems. John Eastman's got a whole lot of other things he's got to worry about in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, he has his own legal bills to worry about. He's not worrying about Donald Trump's this year.
Yeah, so they're going to have fresh lawyers. Presumably, we have to assume, never underestimate your adversaries, that they're going to have better lawyers pushing more aggressive legal theories to try to prevent the accurate certification of elections. So, I wish it was otherwise, but this is where we are. This is why I wrote this piece for Democracy Docket. And honestly, Paige, it's why in 2020 I founded Democracy Docket, because I wanted Democracy Docket to be the leading source for information and news, accurate information, news, and opinion, and coverage about what is happening to democracy and what specifically is happening to democracy in court. I founded Democracy Docket before the post-election 2020. I mean, we didn't know any of that was going to happen. I founded it, frankly, before the pandemic and the expansion of vote by mail, because there was a growing storm on the horizon of using the courts to attack democracy. And also for those of us who believe in free and fair elections, having to rely on the courts to protect democracy. And so I hope everyone is subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. They are an essential read between now and election day. I mean, I think they're essential read all year round, Paige, but they are an essential read for election day, between now and election day. And the 14-member team at Democracy Docket literally works every day to put together news and information and analysis so that you are informed about what the Republicans are up to and what the courts are doing or not doing to protect democracy. So make sure you subscribe. The links are in the show notes. There is premium content for people who want just a little bit more. The additional content gives you more of my thoughts and analysis and some breaking news and some other really exciting events that are coming up. But please make sure you click on the links below. Thank you all for watching this edition of Democracy Docket, and we will be back with more.